Welcome, listeners, to the very first episode of Living with Childhood Trauma. I'm your host, Hamza. In this episode, I'm going to talk about trauma and emotional dysregulation. What trauma does is that, especially childhood trauma, it changes the way you experience your everyday life. Because during childhood, we are very vulnerable and dependent on adults. And in environments that are threatening, we always fear that we would be hurt, and the focus is on minimizing it. It feels like we were living in a war zone. And when we grow up, we carry that with us. And in order to understand how we carry this with us, we need to understand a very important concept. And that concept is the concept of parts. Now, if you read psychology and especially psychotherapy, you will find many manifestations of it. And I would say, like, I'm familiar with the three, so I will talk about the three I'm familiar with briefly. First, psychoanalysis. I think Freud was one of the pioneers to introduce this language, and in psychoanalysis we have three components. We have the ego, the id, and superego. And the id is the part that is unconscious and that is vicious in a sense, sort of an animal. And id is basically our part, our everyday part that behaves as a normal human being, that goes to work, that follow culture, norms, and uh, then you have superego, that is our conscience, that that has all these shoulds that you should do more. You should pray, for instance. If you're a religious person, you have very strong superego that if you're a competent person, there's always this voice that say you're not doing enough. This is not how you behave. Be a man or a woman. You're a strong, independent woman. Behave like one. That is the superego. And I just want to touch upon briefly, and this is how Freudians see it. And then we have schema therapy. Schema therapy has a concept of mods, and mods, in some way, to me, feels quite similar to the Freudian concepts. But again, in case of Freud and psychoanalysis, there are just three components. In case of mods, we have many, but you will see the similarities as I briefly touch upon the most common mods that are being used. So we have the child mods, and then we have uh, dysfunctional parent mods, and then we have a coping mods. So the child mods are basically, when we are in a child mod, we behave like a child. So in case of child mods, we have two dysfunctional child mods that are vulnerable child mod, And vulnerable child mode is basically when we are in that mode, we feel very, very vulnerable. We feel like a small kid that needs someone to hug. And these modes, not necessarily you behave like a small kid. If you are very clingy, that means that your child mode is very dominant, and you would experience it with if you pay attention to yourself, that sometimes you feel very, like you are very vulnerable and pleading, please stay in my life, to your partner who has decided to break up the relationship and giving you that news. And then suddenly you switch and you say, go to hell, I don't need you anyway. And then you're suddenly angry. That is the angry child mode. Now you feel rush of emotion. You feel you wanted to punch that person, and you could actually sometimes physically ended up assaulting the other person, and the other person get baffled like, a moment before you were pleading and now what has happened. And so in schema therapy you switch modes, and then you have the happy child mode. That is when you are happy, you feel like jumping in the puddle, you're laughing, and you are acting like there is no tomorrow. That is your happy child mode. And the then we have dysfunctional parent modes. These are the modes that act pretty much like a super ego that you have in psychoanalysis. So you have this demanding parent mode that demand you that you must always win, you must always be the first, and it's either victory or death, or I don't know. So something that extreme. That is basically the demanding parent mode. And it's not necessarily that if you have that voice, you are going to be like that. Sometimes you just resigned and you're like, you know what? All I can do is be an average person. So I would just accept that I will always be a failure. So why would I bother even trying when I know I will be an average? I will not be that top player. So then this way that you react to a mod is basically your coping mods. So in case of coping mods, what happen is you have this demanding parent mod that want you to do the best, and or this voice that tell you you are dumb, you can't get anything right. So if you have a surrender mod, you would just accept it. Yes, I am dumb. I can't get anything right. And you just resign to that. And you just believe that. And you just keep paying attention to every single person that is giving you that negative feedback. That's all you hear. Then you have an avoidant mode. Avoidant mode is basically when you just avoid the situations where you find yourself being an average if you have a very strong demanding parent mode. So you only do stuff where you know you would excel, and you avoid even trying and going. So you try something new, like for example, you are a genius, you're a math whiz, you can do anything when it comes to math, and you work as as a scientist somewhere in some big organization, and you really want to explore dancing, but then you went to a dance class and you found yourself, oh, you know what, I'm not that good at it, I don't know, I'm struggling. So what you do, if you have an avoidant parent mode, avoidant coping mode, you would avoid doing it at all. You would just go there once and then you would never show your face again. That is avoiding. Then you have overcompensatory mode, where you go all the way against it. So if you have a demanding parent mode and you overcompensate, so next time anyone says something like, you know what, you need to improve yourself a bit. Go to hell. I'm not going to do that. How dare you say that? You overreact to anything, to that mod, because you were geared up to punch anyone in the face who wants to make you feel bad about yourself. So, in case of dysfunctional parents mod, one I already talked about, that is the demanding parent mod. Then we have guilt inducing parent mod, that basically is the voice that makes you feel guilty about yourself, about everything you do. Oh, you know what? I wanted to go to the club alone, but then my friend wanted to come along with me, and I don't really enjoy that person's company. But then I feel the guilt of not taking, being selfish and saying no or making an excuse. That is basically guilt inducing mode. So, guilt inducing mode is basically very strong in people who have parents that use guilt. Oh, I'm so weak, you have to take care of me. I can't manage my on my own. These are the people who, um, these parents are the ones that are responsible for people having guilt-inducing mode, strong mode. And then we have punitive parent mode, where you just punitive is basically parents that punish you a lot for every small thing. And you, if you have that mod, you have a strong mode, you are like that as well. I can't stand people making a smallest mistake. So this is a very brief. I have just briefly touched upon schema therapy. If you are interested, I would highly recommend Breaking Negative Thinking Patterns by Geeta Jacobs, Hanny Van Gendren, and Laura Seabor. I just murdered their name. I will put the link in the description if you're interested in this book. Then we have another therapy that is called internal family system therapy. Internal family system therapy talks about parts, and what internal family system therapy says is that we are a collection of personality. And if you look at it, we use this language a lot. We say things like, a part of me thinks that it's a good idea, but then another part of me thinks that I'm putting myself in, I'm being careless. So we often have this conversation in our head that, a part of me wants to do one thing and another part of me wants to do something else. So internal family system therapy is basically, it actually came out of this uh, conversations, uh, and this is what is actually the source of it. So Richard Shaw's noticed his patients using part language a lot, and then he was like, you know what, why don't I just keep going on with it? And then he discovered that this is not just a way of talking, it is how psyche is internally structured. And you will see a lot of parallels here in all of these three therapies. You would see that uh, they are all basically pointing to the fact that there are multiple personalities. So we are an amalgamation of multiple subpersonalities. It's not like there is one me. So internal family system therapy basically talks about three main parts. The exiles are the part that are basically uh, that hold all our trauma. So for a child that was traumatized, this little child that was constantly beaten up by the parents, and that trauma basically is held by these the exile parts. So they're basically the children that got traumatized because what happened in multiple subpersonalities, there is only one personality that is active at a time. So when they were kids, these are the basically the vulnerable children that got traumatized, and these are the vulnerable parts that took the hit, that were brave to save the day. They were basically the courageous kid who stood up and uh, took the hit and keep everyone else behind them. Then you have these managers part. These are the parts that basically exile protect when they were children. Uh, and these are the parts that go to school, that makes friends, that make sure that things work out, that make sure that when the parent is not angry, they behave like a good kid so that they would not get beaten up more. So, and then the exiles stay behind. Then you have firefighters. These are the parts that basically console the kids. So what happened when these kids were beaten up by a parent and then left on their own? The way they cope with it is a kid, and they're not. Of course, a child doesn't have the capacity to come up with perfect. They don't even have well-developed brains. So what the children would do is that they would do whatever it takes to soothe themselves. So the children often cut themselves, bite their nails, or some of them soothe themselves with even drugs if they get access to it. And these parts that basically come up with these solutions to calm these exiles down, they are basically the firefighters. And the so what happened is during the when they were kids, because another thing is that managers always, and even when they were children, managers always keep these exiles behind them because they know that these exiles are so much vulnerable. They will always cry, and then they are going to irritate the parent, and they will these exiles, uh, they are going to get beaten up again. So the managers, even during the childhood, they keep them behind. But when an adult came in, and when the adults start beating them anyway, then it becomes too much even for the managers and the firefighters to sue them, and then the exiles were out. And that is why the exiles keep getting. So in the beginning, and this is my understanding of it, I would highly recommend that you read Internal Family System Therapy by Robert Schaas. He came up with a new edition of the book to make your own to have a better understanding of it. And I don't have enough time to explain everything, and also I'm myself learning these things, so I would highly recommend reading the original book. Uh, then we have so so these are the three parts, and then we also have a self. And this the idea of self in internal family system therapy is that it's very much it comes from the idea from I feel it's very much inspired by the Buddhism, and also Shaw's understanding of Hinduism and all of these traditions, the spiritual traditions, that once you calm yourself down, you get access to a part that feels serene, that is curious about everything, that that has that is filled with compassion and curiosity, and that part is the self. And this idea comes from and internal family system therapy hold the view that this self is very well developed and everyone has it and it's there. But I think the version that I prefer is basically Janina Fisher's, and her idea. So she came up with a book called Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivor. Her idea of self is basically very close to the to adult healthy adult mod in schema therapy. I missed out the healthy adult mod. So schema therapy also has a healthy adult mod, and the healthy adult mod is basically the adult that is curious, that is concerned, that is compassionate, that behaves like an adult. When I say behaves like an adult, is that, oh, there is a minor inconvenience, so he would not or she would not overreact to it. If somebody heard that adult, the adult would go on and explain to the other person that, see, this is not right, that this adult would set boundaries. Uh, if if the other person is being unreasonable, the adult would sever contact. But at the same time, this adult would not go into this spiral of hurting the other person back or being in the blame game, um, and or hurting themselves by staying in unhealthy relationship. So this is basically the healthy adult mod that schema therapy has. And Janina Fisher's idea of self is very close to that, because internal family system therapy, the way that therapy describes self, is very much mystical. It doesn't feel like it's grounded in reality, because when you what happen is that when you start being more and more self-aware, so you develop yourself as you go along. It is not like it's there and you're just uh, removing the dirt and bringing it. You are. It's not. It's like Michelangelo looking at the stone and freeing a statue, right? But if you look at it as an as as a layman or as somebody like myself, would I be able to free a statue? No. Michelangelo, when he says he frees the statue, uh, and where he was looking at a piece of marble and he sees the statue in that marble. So Michelangelo actually carved it, and that is how it's very much like when it comes to healthy adult mod uh, in schema therapy, and this is how I feel is the self in schema therapy. Sorry, again, I'm saying schema therapy. I mean internal family system therapy. So we talked about this idea of multiplicity, and now I wanted to give you two examples how this all relates to our day-to-day life, and how using this idea we can build the emotional muscles. So these two examples are both from my own life and they are very recent. In fact, today, both of these events happened today. So one of the podcasts I follow is 5 Minute Meditation by Lauren. And in her podcast, what I like is that it's just meditation. There are no sponsorship messages or anything like that. So I would just sit, close my eyes, and press the button. I would press the button, close my eyes, and it's meditation. This time, it was the first time when she had a sponsorship message there talking about her Patreon, her website, and how we can support her. And that message triggers anger. And this is also common with trauma, that the emotional reactions to sometimes things that are very benign are very, very intense. So I was extremely angry. I just stopped listening to the meditation, went straight to her website, and I wanted to write something mean and cruel. What I did was I quickly realized that what is happening is that this is not me. This is the angry child in me that is very, very angry. And this is the angry child part of me that is very, very angry. And because this happened and he wasn't expecting it, and no, it can't be. And that is when I had this realization that this is the angry child. Now what I need to do was I need to deal with this kid just like I would deal with an actual kid who got upset. So the first thing I did was I went to her website, wrote a comment suggesting that I, f- I found this. This is the reason I listened to your podcast because you don't have these sponsorship messages, and I couldn't listen to it because of that. And I suggested she can put all these details in her podcast introduction. No mean words, nothing. The second thing I did was I went back to the podcast and I made myself listen to it. This time, while I was listening, I make sure that I'm aware of this kid and I'm aware where I can feel this kid in my I can feel his anger in my forehead. And what I when I become aware of this kid, what was happening is that this kid was experiencing an adult sitting next to him, and I start talking to. So the first thing is you make, just like an actual kid, when they are very angry, the first thing is you need to make an emotional, you need to make contact. So when we what what that mean, it could be a physical, it could be a physical contact. So when you're feeling the kid, first I would say the first thing is separation. So you need to understand that when you're feeling overwhelmed or angry or rage or hurt, these emotions are coming from your child parts. They are not basically adult you. Once you have this awareness, you can, and then you verbalize it that this kid is very upset. You can verbalize it in your head, or if you are on your own, and you can verbalize it vocally as well. The next step is that once you realize this, now you need to act just like you would act when you have a kid that is very angry, upset, or hurt. So in this case, because the kid was very angry, what I did, I sat with the kid. And then once realize that the kid has calmed down and the kid feel that I'm sitting there, because see, the kids don't have the uh, mental capacity to regulate, so they rely on adults to regulate them. So that's the idea, that's called co-regulation. And these parts are very much like that. They are basically the children you once were. Now, w- the next step was me making me giving this kid words so that the kid could understand you're really upset about it. Yeah, she did that. It was not right. How about we listen to it anyway because you enjoy it? And we have already gone past the sponsorship message. And now when I sat with the kid was still irritated, but I managed to listen. I listened to it with the kid, being aware that the kid was not really happy, but the kid was calm enough to sit down and listen to it. I would not say that it was a complete success, but that's very important. Just like with actual children, you need to keep repeating it because it's like going to the gym, and the first time you do any exercise, it is going to be difficult. Another thing, just like going to the gym, you always, when it comes to making contacts or experimenting with these ideas, it's always better to start with benign triggers. Like, for example, this was me being upset about Lauren having a sponsorship message. It's very benign, it's not something very major. And that way, it is easy for me to practice something new like uh, like this these skills of creating separation and sitting with the child and talking to the child. The second article, the second instance is basically the article a friend shared with me, Four Lies We Tell Ourselves About Our Trauma. It's written by Annie Tanasogran. I believe I pronounced her name correctly. Um, in this article, what triggers me was when she said that we should not assume that all negative emotions are based on trauma. Now, this triggers me very much because being somebody who is suffering from childhood trauma, trauma has an impact on every aspect of my life. So, the reaction I had, and also I think why, again, I would say it was not me who feel that way. It was this child who felt that way, that the child felt that his life has been completely devastated by trauma. And then this person is saying that not all negative emotions are related to trauma. How dare you? That's the reaction of the child. And what that child did, that child would go on and wrote a comment on her website saying, how can you say that? In this situation, again, what I did was I made myself aware that this extreme anger that I'm feeling is not coming from an adult me, but this child part of me that is devastated by trauma and is very, very angry that somebody doesn't understand. And the next thing I did was the same thing. This time again, I sat with the child to make the first contact. Then when I then I decided, then later on, once I was able to make this contact, make this aware, and the way to make this contact with the child is to be aware that the anger is coming from the child. Once you become aware that the anger is coming from the child, that means that you are looking at the child, you are sitting somewhere with the child. That is how you recognize, how you make contact with your child parts. It is giving attention to the kid. And it's the same thing with a child that is crying. So the first thing you do if your child is crying and angry and hitting you or hitting something, the first thing you need to do is give that kid attention. That's the first basic step. That's the first step. I would not say basic step. I would say first step. Uh, the second step is, now once I made this contact, I went back to the article and start reading it. When I start reading it, I could feel the anger the child is feeling. And now I start having this conversation. I feel you're very angry. She shouldn't have written that, right? And then once I finished the article, then I went back to her website and I wrote a comment that this is an excellent article. I would add that trauma has an impact on every aspect of a person's life. So saying that not all emotions are based on trauma is not always true. Now, see the reaction of, so there is a big difference between how a child would react to it and how an adult would react to it. Another important thing, why this is important, is also uh, an important point here. Because the kid is angry, you show the kid that you listen to the kid and then you